Thank you, John. Restating the importance that our governments take back responsibility from the market for the direction and the shape of our communities. Perhaps there's another message there too, John, and that's about leadership. We have to take back leadership and not externalise it, not hand it over to our politicians. Thank you very much. From some perspectives that might be radical thinking, but here it just seems to make sense. Thank you. Look, we're going to move into a question time, but before we do that, we just need to extend some apologies. Firstly, Alison McGarity, Hannah Vale, Malcolm Kerr and Lorraine Kelly. And I'd also like to welcome Councillor Buttigieg, who's here tonight. Mark, thanks very much for coming. It was Mark who moved the motion in Council to support the climate rally, so thanks very much for that. I also want to throw over to Jonathan to say something about the climate camp.
Climate Camp, you may be aware of, last year was held in Newcastle, and it went on for about 5 days in Newcastle with workshops and various events, and with about 500 people attending the camp, and culminated in a direct action which stopped the coal trains for a day on the Sunday at the end of that, and there were over 1,000 people there, including my mum and stepfather. That still, the media usage still uses that as iconic images, those people on the train. So it's something that contributes not just at the time, but thereafter to the image that we are confronting coal, and that coal is part of the problem and we need to do something about it. This year, Climate Camp is coming to Helensburgh. And it's very timely. Those of you that would have seen the leader, there was a copy just here, Tuesday's leader, and last Friday's Herald reported that Minister Keneally has just, bless her cotton socks, approved the further mining at Helensburgh for the next 23 years. On October the 9th to 11th, we'll be having a long weekend down in Helensburgh with workshops and speakers, and also culminating in a direct action where we can get as many people as we can to stand up and peacefully say, we are going to get in the way of this machine. Because we can build as many windmills as we like and as many solar thermal power stations as we like and so on, but unless we stop polluting with coal and other sources, we're going to lose our planet. So climate change is fantastic.
Okay, I'm going to open it up to questions. I think it'd be worthwhile bringing chairs up for you, Richard and John and Frank, and facing the audience here. John, we might start with your question.
God, you're brave. Dorothy did so what? You know, at every public meeting there's always at least one difficult cuss, and particularly if they come from the north side where you've got it. Now, just a few editorials before I start. I am an engineer too, and I really get disgusted when we show the major polluter of the world, the power station, and we draw a cooling tower. Out of the cooling tower comes low temperature water vapour without a drop of CO2 in it. If you want to show the nasty polluter, please give us the thin chimney out of which you see nothing. That's where the CO2 is coming from, not those poor old cooling towers. Now, when I did mathematics, I'm an engineer by the way, we were taught that if you wanted to confuse somebody with figures, the best thing was to draw your graph and make sure you fiddled with the baseline. Don't put the zero line in, draw the graph where you want it to start, and if there's some horrible information back in early times, bring the date forward a bit. So when I see a graph that starts at 1800 and 300 parts per million, I've got to say, please fellas, I'd like to see where the zero is so I can get an idea of what the proportions are, and please, what happened back about 1000? Because I know there were periods of quite severe temperature changes both up and down, and also during those periods we do know what the CO2 level is. And what I'm worried about is you're all going to throw out the baby with the bathwater. We do need to reduce the pollution for whatever reason. We need to stop raping our planet by digging up all the coal and oil. And we need to look at cleaner ways of looking. And if you don't believe me, take a plane to Japan, and when you get opposite China, look out the left-hand window and just have a look at the colour of the sky. Because if we keep on going the way we are, that's how all our skies are going to be. But what I want to know is, has anyone ever taken a small volume of space, put clean air in it in one, CO2 in the other in various quantities, and applied the sun on the outside and measured the temperature? Because I don't think there's a relationship. And I would really like to know how you arrived at this thing that the CO2 drives the temperature up. Because every ice core that's ever been taken out of the Antarctic will show you quite clearly the CO2 level follow the temperature rise. And if we warm up the ocean, the CO2 will come out of it. So, that's my major question. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was the material that I presented, John. I'll respond very briefly because I don't want to turn this forum into a debate on the science. We're here to explore the solutions. If you want to organise an evening to talk about the science of climate change, I'd be very glad to come along to that. But that's not what this is about. But to answer your question very quickly, it's true that in the changes in the ice ages, at least over the last million years, that the temperature change initially preceded the CO2 change. The climate basically flip-flopped between two states, glacial and interglacial, with cold temperatures and warmer temperatures. What caused those changes were subtle changes, as I actually said in my talk, subtle changes in the orbit of the Earth around the Sun. Those changes, there's a cycle, for example, every 41,000 years. And you see that quite clearly reflected in a recurrent pattern in the temperature and greenhouse gas levels. Now, so the temperature rose. And I actually went through this. I'm surprised that you didn't catch this. The temperature rose at a certain point. Let me answer. I'll let you give your question. And as I said, the greenhouse gases rose in response to that. So the initial trigger of the change was the temperature because of the solar radiation increase. That then caused, the temperature change caused a greenhouse gas increase which fueled further temperature change and so on in a feedback pattern. And if you go back, you'll see, as you say, the temperature changes first and then the CO2 follows it. But the initial trigger is not enough to cause the whole leap between interglacial and interglacial. What causes that is this feedback pattern, continual feedback of greenhouse gases and temperature. This is not a science debate, and I think we should move on to solutions. Questions on that?
Thank you. Yep.
I was wondering if one of the speakers could just explain a little bit more with CPRS how permits are extinguished and what exactly is a permit? Is it a permit to emit 1 tonne of CO2, or is it a permit to emit 1 tonne of CO2 per annum and therefore in perpetuity?
Yeah, look, I'll have a crack at that. The permits are basically a permit to pollute for 1 year. So there'll be annual auctioning of the permits. And so what you're doing is purchasing the right, although as John pointed out, in fact, if you're a big polluter, 95% of those permits won't be purchased at all, they'll be gifted to you. We call it grandfathering because that sounds friendly. You know, well, we're grandfathering some permits to people. Isn't that nice? We're giving away $300 million to the owner of the smelter. So it's slightly complicated by the fact that while permits are auctioned annually and they can only be redeemed once, you can actually bank permits. So if you bought some permits in a particular year and you didn't need them, you could sell them to someone else, or you could actually put them in your drawer and use them in the future. The retirement of permits is certainly it's a possibility. So you could club together, buy some permits and rip them up. And basically that's what Penny Wong's saying to people. Look, relax, if you really care, the permits, get this, the permits that I'm giving away for free, you guys can put your hand in your pocket, pull some money out and buy back the permit off the polluter that I gave you. But it's worse than that. It is far, far worse than that. Because imagine you come to me and say, Richard, I'm terribly, terribly concerned about climate change, and I thought I might spend a couple of grand putting a solar panel on my roof. Or I thought I might buy, spend an extra couple of grand and buy a Prius rather than a Corolla. And I said, oh, no, how silly of you. See, what you want to do, well, if you did that, you just free up a permit for someone else. So don't invest in a renewable energy. Don't invest in a fuel-efficient vehicle. How would that help? Buy a permit back off a polluter and rip it up. That's the only way to tackle climate change. I mean, it's just bizarre.
Thank you. Thanks for your question. No, sorry, before I ask you ask a question, John has to go to a telephone interview in 5 minutes. Does anyone have, he'll come back.
Yeah.
Does anyone have a specific question for John? Yes,
Yeah, I do. Sorry, the things you talked about, you ended with a very positive note saying that we can make things happen, climate action groups are really good things, and I'm part of one because I believe that hopefully is the case. But I look at things, say Penny Wong, she's obviously, if you look at her response, I don't know if other people have, her response to Senator Fielden, she obviously understands the science to a reasonable degree. She's not ignorant as some other politicians that I've come across who didn't seem to have a clue about what climate change was. So if they're in the know, they understand it, how can they make such poor choices? I'm left with the feeling that they are so being led by the nose by the CEOs from fossil fuel companies, and basically I'll use the word corrupt because I think that's actually accurate. How do we, as a public, how do we get them away from that news? How do we actually empower ourselves to be able to take control, to get our government to make the mandates they need to make climate change not a reality? And how is this going to happen?
That's a fantastic question, and I totally accept the premise of your question. The premise of your question is completely right. We do have a political class that's captured by the big polluters, and they are calling the shots, and you're quite right. They ought to know better. They ought to understand that the risk in the climate science is such that you can't afford to ignore it. To the question is, how do you do things? Let me just give you one example why I'm optimistic. I would have bet you London to a brick that we would have got that Wong would have got it wrong and Rudd would have got away with the carbon pollution reduction scheme until the climate action groups put forward the argument. Because remember, most of the environment movement, most of the formal environment movement were saying, sign it, something's better than nothing. The leadership came from the grassroots where they said, no, in this case something is actually worse than nothing, we don't want it. I think the next stage is to say, well, that's what we don't want. The next thing I would really be encouraging climate action groups to say, what do we want? What is our vision? And that's why I keep coming back to this idea. Our vision is to shut down coal-fired power stations. Once you do that, everything else follows. As soon as you start saying, we want use-by dates on coal-fired power stations, it's nice and simple. It creates a trajectory to get out of coal. Everything else follows. How we get out of it from then on is a problem for engineers and politicians and everybody else to work that out. But the key driver has to be that we're undermining the presumption that we will be burning coal forever. So the answer to your question is get a simple message, and I would really put forward shutting down coal-fired power stations in a way that creates jobs, using that as your demand, and let's really push that demand into state politics and federal politics. Because we know when we start pushing those demands, if they come from the grassroots, if there's a lot of support from them who will organise, they become somewhat irresistible.
Thanks, John.
Can I just
I've got some sticky yellow labels here if anyone wants to do some.
Can I just say briefly to the end? I just want to reiterate what John said, and that is, there is absolutely no doubt that the Conference of the Climate Action Groups in Canberra fundamentally changed the way that Canberra saw the climate change debate, and for a number of reasons, but the main one being that, I hate to say it, the big organised environment groups that were doing most of the speaking were telling government, it's all right, we'll go along with it. And there'll be a bit of push and shove about it, but people will go along with it. And actually getting a unanimous declaration out of that large group of people, speaking on behalf of a much larger group of people that said, actually, we mean it, we'd rather have nothing than something that locks us into failure, freaked people out in a way that I live in Canberra, and I actually thought that this would happen, so I was just relieved, but a lot of people were very shocked. So, look, I hate to say it, it's politics. These people need the support of other people to stay in their jobs. you know, and push comes to shove, they want to stay in their jobs.
And those other people are us.
And those other people are you, they are.
Yeah.
And they do respond to it, but only if they believe that it's a red hot issue that you will fight them on. And they were betting, this is the thing, they were betting that we would settle for an ordinary scheme that locked us into failure, while the polluters were making it very clear that they would, you know, get a fight tooth and nail to keep their bid. The fact that we've showed people that will fight tooth and nail to get what we want has changed the dynamic. The government still hasn't recovered.
Thanks, Richard. Okay, thanks for the question, Tassia. So I'll come to you now.
I totally agree with John that we should close all coal-fired power stations. But even if everybody in the world stopped their coal firing and all their pollution tomorrow, which is most unlikely, by the year 2100, we'll have 25 metres of sea level rise and an unbearable planet. Now, I think we should spend more time, we should certainly concentrate on stopping pollution, but we also have to think about fighting fire and what we're going to do. How many people can the planet support when we have that situation where the ice caps have melted, the methane's come out of the permafrost, and we have a 7-degree temperature rise and 25 metres of sea level rise. How many people can we support, and what are we going to do about it now?
I'll just give a quick answer from James Lovelock. His answer, I think, was 100,000, and they will be living in Antarctica.
What are we doing now? He's not saying what we're doing. He's just saying what will happen.
But my point is, we have to avoid that.
What are we going to, how are we going to avoid it?
Well, that's what I think there have been whole conferences dedicated to working out the numbers of people on this planet.
None of the political parties will touch the subject.
Well, not here perhaps, but other conferences, ones that Gordon's been involved in, have done just that. Very quickly.
Yeah, can I ask a question perhaps? Richard, you might like to field this one. Our problem, it seems to me, is that we are addicted to growth. We've seen in this country's young history an addiction to convicts. We've seen in America's young history an addiction to slaves. And those two very bad things were overcome by a few people who felt that what we were doing was wrong. It was wrong to have convicts to run the country. It was wrong to have slaves to run America. But there were very powerful, entrenched groups that wanted to maintain slavery in particular before it was overturned. Right now we see that there are a lot of concerned people who are concerned now about the style of the economy, the growth economy that we've got, the way we live, the way we are using up resources, and the fact that we're not leaving much for future generations. The question that's asked here is about how many people we could support and the action that we need to take. It's very clear we need to take some action. We need to take some action about what we're doing with our pollution. We need to take some action. We need to take some action about the amount of resources that we use. All of these things require actions, and it won't be just a matter of going from a coal-fired power station to a wind turbine. It'll be more than that. It'll be a change similar to the change, the move away from slavery. It will be a change, as Frank says, where you bring the government in. It's going to be something that where you're going to mandate a change. It'll have to come from the people, as John's saying. I mean, the ideas are there, but it's all about
challenging the growth paradigm. Is that
yeah, well, the point is that we have to work out how do we move away from the growth paradigm. Richard, I'll give that one to you. How do we move away from that? Because that is going to be right the nub of your problem.
Yeah, thanks.
Like it's the capitalist structure that's keeping it going in a bad way. Is that what you mean? The capitalist ethic? Or...
Okay, Richard, you might respond to that. Frank, I might ask you also to respond to that.
Look, I'm glad you brought up slavery because I often do, and I think it highlights the ethical dimension of solving some problems. I mean, imagine if all countries said, "Well, I'd like to end slavery, but only if you go first," or you know, like countries went, "Look, this is wrong. I'm going to stop it, and then we're just going to try and stamp it out elsewhere." The moral argument outweighed the economic argument in most countries, and in some countries where it didn't, like the US, they had a war about it. Right? But the moral dimension of what they were trying to achieve. Think about, imagine you want to tackle slavery by having a slavery trading scheme. Where stick with me, you don't ban slavery, you have a slavery, permits. Well, actually, that's what the slaves were. They were permits. They were property. Right? And they were rationed because, unfortunately, there are only so many people that they got over there, and then they traded them amongst themselves. So, the whole point was that we wanted to stamp it out. You stamp it out. It's regulation. You change the law. You don't want lead in your petrol, you take it out. It's not rocket science. But to the point about growth, look, I think, there's no, certain things are inevitable and true. It's just the transitions that worry us. You can't have exponential economic growth forever. But you can have it for another 10 years, and maybe you can have it for another 100. I doubt that. But the point, no, it doesn't matter. The point is, you can have a bit more of it, but it can't go forever. But no one wants to stop today. Okay, that's the problem. So problem number one, everyone concedes you can't do it forever, but no one thinks we've got to the point just today that we have to stop. Come on, another couple of years. Come on, it'll be right. Another couple of years. Here's the thing. Economy grows at 3.5%, means we double GDP every 20 years. Double. We're twice as rich as we were in 1989, and 4 times as rich as a nation. As a nation, there are poor people still, but we are 4 times as rich as we were in 1969. The forecast that we're talking about, business as usual, 2050, 2100, by 2029 we'll be twice as rich again. Right? Twice as rich as a nation in 20 years' time. What if instead we were as rich, but with a much better climate? What if we were as rich? But I do think that if we're going to persuade people that we don't have to get stuck on this growth treadmill forever, we have to be very careful, not just with language, but with philosophy. The opposite of growth is regress. All right? The absence of growth doesn't mean decline, it means stability. And we have to be very important, it's very important, I think, that we not sell that zero growth is a goal. What we want is the kind of planet and the kind of country we want, and the growth rate's kind of irrelevant. So it's a long answer, but let me just sort of leave you with this point. There's a simple way that you could slash commuting emissions in Australia by 20%. Work 4 days a week, not 5. Okay? Oh, sorry, but time is the opposite. Leisure time is the opposite of economic growth. If as a society we pursued growth in leisure, if as a society we pursued growth in a whole bunch of things that we want, and substituted those things, worked less if we could afford to do it, and enjoyed ourselves more, we can still talk about growth, which is a wonderful thing, but not economic growth, growth in the amount of stuff. And that's the disconnect that we need to work on. So we don't have to talk about decline, we don't have to live in caves, we just want to grow the things that are important to us.
Thank you.
2 quick points. One is that, as Richard has documented in some of his own writing, is there's a very poor correlation between economic growth and happiness, which is pertinent to remember. Many of us think that if we get richer, we'll get happier, but all the statistical evidence from this growing field of happiness research suggests that that's not the case. But, and here's the rub, people in poverty cannot be asked to remain in poverty. People getting out of poverty fairly reliably do get happier. But there's a certain point at which there's no further correlation between economic progress and human happiness. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important because, particularly on a global scale, the problem of economic inequality looms very large in this debate. If we can't solve the problems of inequality between rich and poor, within nations and between nations, we're going to find great difficulty in getting collective agreement on a global scale to address this problem. That's why I think the challenge of ecological sustainability is inexorably linked to the challenge of social justice.
That same research from the Australia Institute says that happiness is strongly related to connection and relationship. If we had the extra day's leisure time, we'd have more time for relationship and connection.